Hey guys, how's it going? So I'm here for yet another tag. This is the Reading the Humanities tag. This tag was created by Mark of Richardson Reads, and he also tagged me. So, um, thank you for tagging me, Mark, yet again. Yeah, this is a great tag. It's a really meaty tag. There's a lot. There's a lot to it. There's a lot to talk about in it, and it's kind of what's great about it, as Paul Kennedy said in his rendition of the tag. It's a great tag. Just sink your teeth in and talk about a lot of different subjects that you like in depth a little bit. So anyway, yeah, I will just jump right into the first prompt, which is name a book or author who uses the field of or concepts from anthropology in their work. And for this, I am going with Blues People by Amiri Baraka. Amiri Baraka is also known as Leroy Jones. Leroy Jones was his birth name. Amiri Baraka was a pen name that he took later in his career. But Amiri Baraka is most well known as a significant 20th century American poet. But this is not poetry. This is a nonfiction history book that he wrote about the history of blues music, and to an extent jazz music. And as anyone who knows much about that subject will know, that history is inextricably intertwined with just the history of African Americans, and the sort of deep origins of blues music are in the music of the tribes from Africa, from whom slaves were taken and forced into slavery in the Americas, and by extension, the music that was sung by African Americans during slavery. So they had a lot of work songs, they had a lot of hymns, and those were sort of influenced by European music, but they were also heavily influenced by the music that they took from Africa. They were just sort of Christianized after they were converted to Christianity, and so that sort of deep origin of blues music requires the use of a lot of anthropological work to examine it. And this is also just a great book. All the books that I'm going to talk about here are recommendations, but this is one that I don't think is that well known, and it's just a really great, really well written piece of nonfiction. So yeah, if you're at all interested in not only blues music but the history of African Americans, this is a great and approachable, pretty short work on the subject. So yeah, and the second prompt is a book or author who uses archaeology in their works, and this is sort of not really the proper response that this prompt I think is looking for, because it's not really an author who uses archaeology. It's more like the work itself is emerged from archaeology. So the book I have here is the Nag Hammadi Scriptures. This volume is edited by Marvin Meyer, and so the Nag Hammadi Scriptures are a series of documents that were important in Gnostic Christianity, which is sort of a movement of Christianity that was prominent in the early centuries AD, and so the reason that I put this for this prompt is because these scriptures, the manuscripts from which we have these scriptures, were found in 1945 by complete accident. I think I heard the story once that it was a shepherd out in sort of the wilderness in Palestine was just sort of killing time, tossing rocks places, as people do sometimes. And then he just heard, when he threw a rock at one point, he heard pottery breaking, and he went to investigate because he didn't he didn't know of any pottery that should be lying around, and went into this cave and found basically just jars full of these manuscripts of these really important scriptures. And this became one of the most significant archaeological discoveries of the 20th century. And yeah, so they were, I think a lot of them were written in Greek, perhaps some of them in Aramaic as well, and Hebrew perhaps. But yeah, they were all translated and compiled with commentaries as well into this gigantic volume. I did try to read this at one point and got about 200 pages in, and I do want to finish it. It probably qualifies for March. It comes very close to qualifying for March of the Mammoths. It's like 790 something pages. So perhaps I will use it next year for March of the Mammoths. But yeah, so that is the second prompt, and yeah, again, kind of a cop out answer, but I think this is a really interesting volume to have. So yeah. And number 3 is have you read a work from ancient Greece or Rome? If so, what was it, and do you have a favorite author or work? I have read a decent number of the works of ancient Greece and Rome. It is sort of a special area of interest of mine. I really like the classics of Greece and Rome. Yeah, so, and I, for this, have gone with a favorite Roman author, or favorite work from a Roman author, and favorite work from a Greek author. And so my favorite work by a Roman author would be Ovid's Metamorphoses. Yeah, by far my favorite book that I've read from Roman literature. Just on a page by page enjoyment basis. On just connecting with the characters and the stories and being moved by the stories. This is just a great piece of literature, and honestly, really approachable. Arguably, I think Ovid's Metamorphoses is more approachable than like Homer, or certainly more approachable than Virgil. Yeah, and I mean, it is a little bit long. I mean, this isn't so long, but not even 400 pages. But yeah, I just hugely enjoy Ovid, and yeah. So, but then my favorite Greek author, and if I had to give an overall favorite author from the ancient Greek and Roman world, this would probably be him, and it's Euripides. So one of the 3 major Greek tragedians that we have surviving works of, and this is a collection of 10 of his plays. And yeah, he's just great. Just huge psychological insights in every work of his. The plays often center around an intense argument between 2 people, and each person has essentially, each person is to an extent in the right. There's no easy answers in terms of who's right in this argument. So that just that just makes him a great psychologist when he brings out these arguments between people. He's great. Number 4 is history. Do you have a favorite historical period you enjoy reading about? If so, what is it? Are there any books that stand out? I don't so much have a favorite historical period so much as a favorite historical subject. I really like the history of religion, and in particular, I like the history of Christianity and Islam, more so focusing on the Islam side, with certain touchstones in the relations between Christianity and Islam. So like the Crusades would be a big area of interest for me, but some books that I've read and enjoyed on the subject: Islam, A Short History by Karen Armstrong, which is just a very small, slim overview of the history of Islam from the time of the Prophet Muhammad to 9/11. Also Karen Armstrong's other book, The Case for God, which sort of touches on Judaism as well, and Hinduism and Buddhism as well. It's basically just about how God has been conceived throughout the history of religion, and that necessitates going into a lot of theology and thinking, many of which was done by Islamic scholars and theologians. The Crusades by Thomas Asbridge, and The Crusades Through Arab Eyes by Amin Malouf. 2 great books about the Crusades. The Asbridge books focuses more on the European perspective, and the Malouf book focuses more on the Middle Eastern perspective, the Muslim perspective. And both are just great reads. The Asbridge book is much longer, but both are great. And then Empire of the Mind, A History of Iran by Michael Axworthy, which is it's an incredibly readable, really gripping book, and Iran is just an absolutely fascinating country. I need to reread that book, actually, because Iran is just a fascinating country. And again, that's not specifically the history of Islam, but it is a country where Islam has played obviously a big part in its history. And you could say the same thing about the last book I have here, which is A History of the Arab Peoples by Albert Hourani. which is kind of a sort of a modern classic of history. But yeah, again, the title is pretty self-explanatory, and it's a great, just again, overview of the history of this area, and it does start with the founding of Islam, so it is in a sense. Again, tied up with the history of Islam in that way. So yeah, unfortunately, I can't really pin it down to one of those books, but I've really liked all of those, and would recommend all of them. Number 5 is linguistic or languages. Reading is about language, among other things. What is your favorite translated work of literature? And I am going with Stephen Mitchell's translation of the Epic of Gilgamesh, which is just absolutely beautiful. He really does a brilliant job of just making this, really old, archaic epic that could seem really antiquated and not very interesting to modern readers. He just does a great job of making it approachable and readable for modern readers. And I found this book incredibly moving, with some, again, just brilliant human insights, which I wasn't really expecting from this old epic again. And this book appeared on my list of top 10 favorite books of all time when I did Jason's top 10s tag. And also Stephen Mitchell's introduction is just full of insights into the epic. I think part of the reason I ended up loving the epic so much was just because of Stephen Mitchell's introduction, which is really just a great sort of piece of nonfiction on its own. And it's almost 40 pages, so it's a lengthy piece on its own. So anyway, yeah, definitely hands down. Next, number 6, law and politics. Do you read political books or books related to the law? What are your favorites? So I study political psychology, which is a small subfield within psychology that looks at the psychology of politics and political behavior. I focus on political ideology, so liberalism and conservatism, and sort of the psychological underpinnings of liberalism and conservatism. There are a lot of fascinating psychological differences between people who tend to be more politically liberal and people who tend to be more politically conservative. And I can't really name a book on this subject because most of what I read is sort of academic articles. So as much as I would love to talk about, my area of research, it's not exactly that relevant to the question. If anyone wants a video on that subject, then let me know. I would be happy to. I did write my master's thesis on the subject, so there is that. But in terms of books, books that I have read on the subject of law and politics, the thing is that I don't really the things that I tend to like about books about politics don't tend to be the political aspects of them. It tends to be more the intellectual aspects of them or the psychological aspects to them. So most of the books I've read about politics are political philosophy, which is kind of a little area that I've tried to read a little bit in, again, because I study political psychology, so it's kind of a good area to know when you're studying that area of psychology. But what I tend to be most struck by is just the intellectual stimulation that these books can give, and the psychological insights. So the first favorite would be Plato's Republic. Again, for that first thing I said, that it just provides a lot of intellectual stimulation. It's just an incredibly thought-provoking book. And that's why I love it. And, it still has a lot of brilliant insights into... I think the insights that are most relevant are probably about democracy, or about how the republic deteriorates. Goes from an aristocracy to a democracy to a timocracy to a tyranny. I can't quite remember the precise trajectory of it, but that sort of narrative of the collapse of the republic is, I think, sadly relevant today. But even just beyond that, there are a lot of things in here that I disagree with, like outlawing, singers and poets. Obviously, I disagree with that, given that I love literature. But again, that's not really what it's about. It's about the stimulation I get by arguing with Plato on certain subjects like that. So, yeah. And then the second book that I have here is Discourse on the Origin of Inequality by Jean-Jacques Rousseau. And here it's primarily for the psychological insights, because the primary source of unhappiness, Rousseau argues in here, is the fact that we, in sort of agriculturalized and industrialized society and settled societies, we live so much through how other people perceive us, and how we perceive they perceive us. And that is the source of so much human unhappiness. It's true. And just that psychological insight, the fact that it's contained in this book, a century or more before the rise of modern psychology, is just incredible to me. So yeah. Okay. Number 7. Literature does not have a universally accepted definition. What is yours? That's a tall order. I'm afraid my definition doesn't really. I don't think it adds that much to any sort of a discussion on the subject. But what I wrote down was that literature is just writing that lasts, basically. Writing that many people read and find valuable, and that many people reread and continue to find valuable throughout the centuries. So yeah, I think that's a pretty standard definition, I would say. Again, doesn't add all that much, but I sort of wonder, like, who am I to even answer this question, So yeah. Anyway, I'll move on to number 8. So number 8 is philosophy is the love of wisdom. Have you read a work of philosophy, and do you have a favorite? I have read a decent number of works of philosophy. A lot of my when I was just getting into reading, a lot of the books I read were philosophy. So I've read a decent number. I'm not the most well-read person who's into philosophy, but still. And a favorite that I picked, some of my favorites I've already named. The Discourse on Inequality and the Republic, certainly. But just for the sake of originality, and because this thinker has had a huge influence on me, I am going with Essays and Aphorisms by Arthur Schopenhauer. Arthur Schopenhauer is a 19th century German philosopher. I think he was a younger contemporary of Goethe's. I think he actually knew Goethe, or met him, or was in correspondence with him at least. But anyway, he is he's what's called a philosophical pessimist. And if there's anyone to whom the word pessimist applies well, it is definitely Arthur Schopenhauer. There is a rather heartbreaking passage in this book where he essentially says that people who commit suicide actually have the right idea, that it would actually be better for us as humans if we had never been born, or if we were to just kill ourselves. We would be happier if we had never been born, or if we killed ourselves. So that is just how bleak he is about life. He essentially saw human life as a series of, you set a goal for yourself, you say, if I have this, XYZ, if I have this, I will be happy, and then you go, and you get XYZ, and then you realize that it really did not bring you happiness, and then when you're left with that, you think, so either I can just sit around and get bored and be sad, or I can just set myself another goal, set my sights on something else that I think will bring me happiness, and so I want to go get that, so I go after ABC, I get to ABC, I realize that ABC also didn't bring me happiness, so once again I'm faced with a choice of either just moping around bored and sad, or just setting yet another goal, and so that is what I do. And then how is that all rewarded? How is all that pointless labor rewarded? It's not rewarded with going to heaven, or even going to hell, because Schopenhauer was an atheist. It's just rewarded with oblivion when you die. So, yeah, he's a bleak thinker, but there is some light in his philosophy. He did believe that we could find sort of at least momentary transcendence from this cycle of hedonism through sort of art, and not just through art. Art defined sort of broadly as sort of more just like transcendental experiences. So like beholding a breathtaking landscape, or having a sort of a spiritual experience of some sort. He did believe we could find sort of momentary solace in such experiences, but on the whole, he's very pessimistic. Yeah, that's had a big impact on how I view the world. I also view human life as very bleak. I really do. But I don't let it get me down, obviously, or else why would I be on BookTube? And honestly, it's like, even Arthur Schopenhauer lived a life. Clearly, even though he said it would be better to commit suicide or to have never been born, clearly he did not commit suicide, so clearly he saw some value to being alive. Anyway, that's just a work of philosophy that is on my mind a lot, probably. It's probably the ideas in that book I think about more often than really any other book of nonfiction that I've ever read. So yeah, anyway. Number 9 is religion. Name a book or author that you have read that has influenced your own personal view of religion. And for this, I could go back to Karen Armstrong, who I mentioned earlier, her book, Islam, A Short History. And perhaps even more so, her book, The Case for God, had a huge impact on how I think about religion. It really gave me a complex view of religion, that, she writes often in opposition to the new atheists, Chris Hitchens, Richard Dawkins, etc. She often writes in opposition to them, pointing out the sort of intellectual history of religion, the fact that religion has provided a lot for humans that has been good, as well as some that's been bad. And I think that that's an important insight that Karen Armstrong provided to me. I think another author, just to be a bit more original, who had sort of a similar impact on me was Marilyn Robinson, especially in this novel, Gilead, where again I just realized it just drove home the importance of religion and what it does for people, aside from the negative impact it can have on the world. And that was important for me to see that side of religion, because I grew up in a house of atheists, essentially, and my dad and my brother probably would be very sympathetic towards the new atheists, and I still argue with them sometimes over this. But so having this perspective was very important to me as someone who was raised in that kind of atmosphere. So anyway. Number 10 is performing arts. Musicology, theater, and dance often put the performer front and center. Do you have a favorite performer? If so, who is it, and why did you appreciate their work? Is there a book about this performer? So it's hard for me to come up with really the conventional answer to this question, just because, there are a lot of performing arts that I like. I love ballet. I love opera. I obviously have a lot of favorite musical artists. But in terms of naming names, it's hard. I don't know that many specific ballet dancers. I don't know that many specific opera singers yet. And so I decided to just take this opportunity to name a lot of my favorite figure skaters, because figure skating is, for me, first and foremost, a performing art, even though not everyone sees it that way. The first two are respectively my favorite male skater and my favorite female skater. So my favorite male single skater is Daisuke Takahashi, who is a brilliant Japanese skater. He was the first man from Japan to win an Olympic medal in men's figure skating, the first Japanese man to win the World Championships, and the first Japanese man to win the Grand Prix of figure skating final. So he's one of the most decorated skaters from Japan, and he's just a great performer. I kind of idolized him a lot when I was young, and sort of still do. But yeah, he really is just first and foremost an artist, and then my favorite female skater is Carolina Kostner, an Italian figure skater who has won many of the great competitions. She's won the World Championships, she's won the Grand Prix finals, she's won an Olympic medal, an Olympic bronze medal, which should have been an Olympic silver medal, but we won't get into that. Um, and she's very original. She never does anything conventional. She just comes up with the best crafted programs to skate, and they're just beautifully choreographed. Everything is woven in seamlessly, from the jumps to the spins and the footwork and everything. She's wonderful. And then ice dancing couples, and I could not narrow it down to one. So Tessa Virtue and Scott Moir, the Canadian ice dancing couple who have won 2 Olympic gold medals and 2 Olympic silver medals, must be one of the greatest of all time. Marina Anasina and Gwendal Pezera, French couple, although Marina Anasina is originally from Russia. They won the Olympics in 2002, and they had a brilliant flamenco program that year when they won the Olympics. And yeah, I'll try to leave links to my favorite programs by each of the skaters and couples I mentioned, just for anyone who cares. And then the last two, Gabriela Papadakis and Guillaume Cizeron, French ice dancing couple who are still competing, who are brilliant. And then Jane Torval and Christopher Dean, the legendary British ice dancing couple who are often still touted as the greatest ice dancing couple of all time, not without good reason. And finally, number 11, we made it to the last question. Visual arts. Do you have a favorite visual artist or media type? Do the two relate? Are there any books that address this relationship between artist and medium? The second part of this question about do the two relate and are there any books? I don't really know. I'm not very well versed in visual arts. A lot of so my favorite medium for visual arts would definitely just be painting, which is not very original, but that's just how it is. But even there, I'm not that well versed in it as an art form. I just sort of know what paintings I like. So some of my favorite painters, Tom Clement is a contemporary Irish-American painter. J.M.W. Turner, British painter from the 19th century. Diego Velázquez, who is painting Christ on the Cross, is possibly my favorite painting of all time. Egon Schiele, an Austrian artist who was just very strange, just did a lot of weird portraits. He's very known for doing nude paintings of women, but my favorite painting by him is actually his self-portrait. Franz Klein, an abstract expressionist, who I think I've mentioned before. And then Vasily Kandinsky, who, he's just, he's crazy. I don't know. His paintings are very strange, but yeah, I love the colors in them. So, yeah, and number 12 tagged someone. I think Mark may have tagged just about everyone who I would have tagged, so I tag anyone who's watching this who wants to do this. Anyway, I will wrap this up because it's been almost a half hour. I did start this year in BookTube wanting to keep my videos short, and it's just not working. But anyway, anyway, I'm not going to worry too much about it. So I will talk to you all later, and I hope you're all having a good weekend, and have a nice day.